German Chancellor Angela Merkel concluded a three-day trip to 3 West African countries with stop in Nigeria. Well, focus on strengthening economic development as well as containing illegal migration, topmost. Now, for this relationship, the visit of the German Chancellor to Nigeria is being described by many as a welcome development, and analysts are also of the mind that, well, economic issues, like I pointed out, illegal migration, security matters, and some of those were pointers before President MUHAMMADU BUHARI. Now, he also added that the German government has been very responsive and interested in how things work in Africa. Now, with Nigeria's posture as the giant of Africa, what does this visit portend for nation's economy as well as the fight against insurgency? That's our program, Nigeria Today. We'll take a look at some of this as well as other attendant issues. Welcome to the program. My name is Blessing Abu. Now, joining me on set, I would like to welcome first to my immediate left, former Deputy Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations, Ambassador Usman Serki. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, madam.
And joining him on set is Dr. Mukhtar Imam. He's a lecturer at the Department of International Relations and Diplomacy at Bayes University here in Abuja. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Now, it's been a flurry of European leaders. First was Macron, May followed, and Merkel is here. MMM, well, not the other MMM, I would say. So really, what is the new, what is it that is now the attraction? Yes, I know they've always been coming to different parts of the world.
Yes.
Yeah. Ambassador.
Thank you, Blessing. Well, it indicates the importance of Nigeria in the global economic and trade equation. All these countries, they are going out, finding out actually, looking for opportunities for their business people, for investors, for their banks, for their industries. And Nigeria and Africa, I think we can say we are the last frontier in the world for sustainable investment, where returns can be made to own investments by these countries. Ignoring Africa for the last 20 years or so by the Europeans has been to their peril. China stepped in actually to fill the vacuum, and they are feeling the pinch now that when they ignore Africa, countries like Nigeria, they are making a huge mistake in terms of denying their industries, their banks, their financiers, and their commodity traders the opportunity to tap into the growing, among the fastest growing economies in the world. And I think that realization forced them to turn back, retrace their step. Where did we go wrong? Let us make amends at the highest level. And that is why we saw the flurry of visits, you know, to Abuja, to Dakar, to South Africa, and soon you will see them in Nairobi and Addis and other places. Yes. So I think it's very important, we too, for us to assess this reality, these new dynamics, and where do we place Nigeria to maximally benefit from this relationship that is emerging now.
Okay, there were high expectations, Doctor. There were high expectations, especially for Angela Merkel's visit. And what is it really that we, apart from what Ambassador has just said, that we must really tap into?
Yes.
So it will not just be, okay, it's one of those visits.
Yes. Thank you very much. You see, the globe, the global, the international polity today is taking a different dimension. Goalposts are changing, alliances and realliances and all of that. We see the rise of decline of populism, protectionism in the birthplace of populism. Trump is talking America first. And then again, of course, you find that the United States is at loggerhead with the EU, is at loggerhead with China, and all of these scenarios. It's a defining moment. And so you find that there is the search for alliances within the international system. Of course, diplomacy and foreign relations are very essential ingredients as far as our contemporary times is concerned. As a matter of fact, growing interdependence among nation states is majorly one of the 3 reasons that have helped to avert a Third World War. Countries today are becoming even much more dependent upon one another. And it's a welcome development as far as diplomacy and foreign policy is concerned. But then again, of course, politics, whether domestic or international, is about needs and interests. It's about the big question mark is on the position of different states and state actors.
Okay, let's play it down to our own needs and interests. Like
yes,
that.
that's
me
exactly
borrow your
where I was
words.
going
Now,
to go to, yes.
most times we've entered so many relations, whether trade or otherwise. It's as if we're always at the receiving end of the stick.
Yes.
How do we maximize it?
No doubt about that. You see, I was going to look at this from a more general perspective to the specific. By general, I'm talking about the entire African continent. See, conventionally, the conventional wisdom in analyzing Africa is to see a continent that is doomed and gloomed. Out there in Western philosophies, this is what you find in literatures. Contrary to that, there's a whole lot going on in Africa. With the enormous resources we possess in Africa, this is the second largest continent in the world, if not the largest. And then, of course, with mineral and human resources that we possess. See, there have been this debate around how do we maximize, not necessarily maximize. The likes of Ambassador here himself, Professor Gambari, the late Ali Mazrui, have all reason to spark this debate and have these conversations around how does Africa renegotiate its position within the international system. We're talking about a world order where we're discussing a set of relationship among nations within the international system. Who controls what? Now, that is what politics is about. Whether domestic or international, it's about who gets what, when, and how. Of course, the how is not defined. So you find state actors carrying out whatever tool available at their disposal to be able to maximize benefit of potentials rather of whatever agreements they go into, bilateral, trilateral, however you look at it. So therefore, these are some of the things you will find. 3 questions were raised as far as how Africa will be able to reposition itself and renegotiate its position. One of the 3 is that, 1, we need to remove the discriminatory practices within the international system. Secondly, we must demand that privileges are removed as far as small or big countries are concerned within the international system. And thirdly, and most important, is that we must redefine the distribution or equitable distribution of resources within the international system. But the question here is how? Are you going to sit back and allow other people? Because in politics, there is no give. You must take. Colin Powell, let me end before Ambassador comes in, stated once that man is an amoral being and that science and technology is the most precious resources to the United States. And he ends by saying, do you expect the same amoral being to transfer to you his most precious mineral resources?
Certainly. The human being is first selfish during the first instance. So let's take a look at Ambassador, renegotiate. How do we begin to renegotiate our position? Now, we know Chancellor Merkel came on with the business delegation, and of course most of the interest will be on small businesses, family businesses back there in Germany, which is what we're trying to look at in terms of our own ERPG, that's economic recovery. How do we begin to renegotiate all those ones to actually have a firm stand based on what Dr. Tu has explained?
Well, we have to, first of all, to know our strengths and weaknesses. First, if we are to renegotiate and realign ourselves, we have to start at a level where bilaterally we can make readjustments in terms of our relationship with the major powers. Okay. France, Germany, United Kingdom. These are the 3 biggest economies in Europe, and all their leaders came to meet with our president. Okay. I think this gives us a leverage in terms of having bilaterally to discuss our relationships economically, financially, commercially, reposition Nigeria to take advantage of the opening up that they are doing, for us, presently. And then after strengthening our bilateral positions with these countries, we can now look towards the multilateral framework where we can go as part of an African-Caribbean, for instance, compact to negotiate with the European Union. And we will be in the leadership position to do that. Now, we don't even have the influence to regionally influence the outcome of structural economies. Why are we not
so strong to do that?
Well, our economy, for instance, first of all, is not strong enough to provide the necessary dynamism to change the equation regionally in Africa.
Well, these are some of the issues over the years. Why are we still lagging behind in doing that?
Yeah, well, I think that you will need another 1 hour program for that, you know, for us to explain these things. But I think, you know, leadership in Africa will give us the strategic leverage to influence the outcomes of global trade. But at the moment, we cannot do that. So we have to look inwards, West Africa and then Africa, then go to the global stage. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, it took them 16 to 20 years in terms of critically negotiating and realigning among themselves their economies and terms of trade before launching themselves upon the global scene to demand certain rules-based structures or interrelationship that will be beneficial to them. So I think, you know, we need to look inwards first, readjust ourselves in terms of what we do internally, and then in our sub-region, and then in the whole African continent. Then we can now confront Europe as a bloc, or go to the WTO and renegotiate these strategic outcomes that we want to see.
Okay, what we agree of, well, for those who agree that it's not just mere coincidence that these three leaders have to visit within the span of a quarter. It's still on the front burner to know that trade and also at least trade issues have not really been balanced on the whole. They've talked about the need for Europe to open up to Africa in terms of trade and all that kind of product. But Nigeria especially, now being, of course, the big power, like we'll say, on the continent, and also the market is there as well in terms of number, that's numeracy now. How do we begin to realign some of those agreements? Of course, if you recall, President Buhari was in Germany, that's the last 2 years, even 2015, I think, when we came into power. For this return visit, let's make it up against as a return visit. What have we been able to do within this span of 2 years of all those movements for the administration?
Well, I think to answer that, President Muhammadu Buhari's first priority when he came into office was security. You know, tackling Boko Haram insurgency and other security-related issues.
Which is the interest of the German government
and
as well.
That was what he took to the meeting in Berlin, I think, you know, at the G8 or G7 meeting at that time, to present Nigeria's case and his immediate needs towards addressing the insurgency in the northeast. And I think the Germans and the Europeans rallied around him to their credit in terms of actually, you know, giving the necessary support, you know, for the government to succeed in its counterinsurgency efforts. Then the next thing was actually, you know, the repatriation of stolen funds. This was very critical on his agenda, and I'm sure he raised it at different levels with the British Prime Minister, the UK Prime Minister, the French President, and maybe with Angela Merkel. I think these are things that the President has to keep on knocking, you know, on, to nail them on the spot and obtain specific outcomes in terms of how much is there in their countries, you know, held by them that belong to us rightly, and for them to return. But the legal intricacies of returning stolen funds are very deep, very wide, and difficult. So we have to navigate all these things, and a very competent, high-level team, if needs be, an international team has to be put together to pursue these things and bring them back.
Yes, we've been on that talk. Yes.
The third issue, of course, is opening up the European economy, the market for Nigerian goods. And I think Nigeria should not only speak for Nigeria. When the president speaks, President Muhammadu Buhari should speak for Africa when it comes to issues of common concern, common interest, like trade. You know, the more they open up for Africa, the more Nigeria benefits. Let us remember that there are almost virtually in all African countries Nigerian businessmen and women.
Certainly.
So opening up for Africa means opening up for Nigeria. So we should lead, we should be the spearhead for that. So in terms of that, but we have to organize, like I say, put our homes in order. To what extent will Nigerian banks support export, for instance? I don't think we have any commercial bank in Nigeria among the private banks that can support $100 million structural financing of any deal. I don't know, but I doubt if we have any. And by the ratings of global trade, $100 million is very, very quintessentially elemental in terms of its quantity. It's nothing when we are talking of global trade amounting to tens or hundreds of billions. So our banks should be able by now to handle anything between 500 million to $1 billion transactions. But I doubt if they can do that.
Wow.
And this is something that the government has to.
That is why this program is there. I'm sure we'll find reactions already coming by way of saying this is how it is really. Okay, Doctor, as well as Ambassador, we'll go on a break now. When we return, issue of illegal migration, of course the security which you already started talking about, as well as other issues that could have been tabled before the two leaders will be our focus next when we return from this break. You're watching Nigeria Today, and our focus is on the German Chancellor Angela Merkel's visit to Nigeria. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.
The Nigerian Television Authority News 24 channel, your dependable all-round news station, offering you world-class news programs, documentaries, spotlights, promos, and information highlights. Take advantage of our network reach and advertise your interest, goods and services with us. NTA News 24. First equals with digital broadcasting. You can reach us on Channel 21 Terrestrial TV and Channel 101 on the StarTimes platform. For more inquiries, please call Coretta 0803 618 9986 or Henry on 0803 379 0884. Join us today.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, the program is Nigeria Today, and our discussion is on the German Chancellor's visit to Nigeria and other matters arising from aspects of bilateral relations and even so the multilateral relations as well I've talked about. Now, illegal migration, particularly by Nigerians to Germany, is of concern to both leaders. And there were indications that some Nigerians were to be deported. So what's the position, and what do you see playing out in this regard?
In this regard, the critical thing to note here is this: migration in itself is a long-standing issue. It has always been there. It's a lifelong phenomenon, so to speak. But then illegal migration is something, on the other hand. To be able to tackle issues of illegal migration is not about building tall fences or walls. It's about, one, building longer tables to be able to reach out to these countries, because the crisis of migration falls in three different dimensions: countries of origin, countries of transit, and of course countries of destination. These three countries need to come together to collectively tackle these crises. If the issue is left to one of the countries, it's just it can be equated to the crisis of terrorism, for example, that is becoming internationalized today. Boko Haram, for example, has taken an international dimension. The same thing happens with migration. These people are leaving countries of origin because they are trying to seek better pasture and all of that. So these are some of the crises. Now, if we're able to put our house in order, it certainly will create an enabling environment for people to sit back home and thrive. I've said this consistently, and I've told ambassadors, particularly the Chinese ambassador, an average Nigerian has entrepreneurship skills in his DNA. It's burning inside. He wants to do something, but the enabling environment has not been created. It leads us back to what Ambassador has mentioned, that we must put our house in order. Yes, of course, the fear will be on the part of the Germans, the fear will be on the part of the entire Europe. But then, back here, we must save our face. We have just been described as the poverty capital of the world. That doesn't speak well for us. Yes, that could be an exaggeration and all of that, but then the first measure to tackling a problem is identifying or acknowledging that the problem is there. So basically, these are some of the things that require urgent attention. We have a deficit in three basic categories: a deficit in peace, a deficit in development, and a deficit in governance. How do we tackle some of these crises, infrastructural problems, for example? How do we harness our resources, like Ambassador mentioned here? You see, the rise and fall of every power is predicated upon its economic prowess. If you do not have money, you cannot have a bargaining chip, let alone have a conversation or a negotiation.
That's always been a problem. this is a concern for us as
yes,
a
it is
nation
a
and even
concern for
the
us
continent.
as a people, yes. And of course, on the bigger picture as a continent, we must be able to put, first of all, our house in order, and then we can come to the international scene and have a rational conversation. Without putting the basic things in place, there is absolutely no way we're having any diplomacy. You bargain from one of three positions, either a position of strength, weakness, or in no position at all. What gives you the capacity to make a bargain and draw the pendulum in your favor is what you're bringing to the table, what you have to offer. At this point in time, like I mentioned in the beginning, there's a realignment going on within the international system. We find that there's a new scramble for Africa. And this scramble for Africa is basically being led by the Chinese. Today, the Europeans have seen that, like the ambassador mentioned, that they need to retrace their steps back. Africa is a continent that cannot be neglected. And so they are returning back to Africa to be able to see where did we get it wrong. This is a time where we should tell them that we look them headlong like a king meeting a king and have a rational conversation. We have the resources. These are the things you require. We will give them, but then it has to be on our terms.
How strong do you see our own bargaining power capacity?
Of course,
from what
look at Nigeria. Look at Nigeria, for example. We have China doesn't have half the mineral resources we have in this country. Yes, of course, the one thing that has kept the Chinese economy afloat is the population. It has human resource, and it has been able to manage that significantly. We also have that as well. So when you look at this, this is the largest mobile market in Africa, for example. This is the most populous black country in the world. 187 million people is enough resources. So we must try to harness all of these resources, pull them together, put our house in order, and then we go to the negotiation table and have a rational conversation. As far as migration is concerned, so long as these issues are not dealt with, these people are not going out there to look for white faces. They're going out there to seek greener pastures. They are going there because they have infrastructures we don't have. Nigerians abroad are excelling in different spheres of life. Why are they not here? This is the big question we should be asking ourselves.
Well, that is the next question I'm asking the ambassador too. Now, I know for Germany too, they're also trying to push out their small and medium-scale businesses, like what's already pointed out, which is one thing we have in its own number, but harnessing properly has been our challenge. How do we make it a win-win situation for all, based on these visits we've had?
Thank you. But first, I want to return to the issue of migration. I think it's wrong for us to look at migration to categorize migration as illegal. There is nothing like illegal migration. Migration is a movement of people conditioned by specific circumstances.
So one is regular and it's irregular.
Polemically speaking, there are between 15 to 20 million people of European descent in Africa. They migrated to this continent. This is not their continent. They migrated here over centuries. Nobody today refers to them as illegal migrants. So if our people move to Europe, even in temporary capacity, to go and look for work and come back, I think we ourselves should not refer to them as illegal migrants. Germany, today you go to Namibia, the number of people of German descent, virtually, there are about 1 million or so. I think in South Africa, people of European descent are about between 8 to 10 million. Nobody refers to them as illegally being in Africa.
But when they are there without the regular papers or requirements, that makes it
regular papers and requirements.
Some of them
in centuries.
Speaking of illegal migration, there's enough blame to go around. There's enough blame to go around.
Yeah. So to stem this, I think Europe needs to engage with us objectively, transparently, and to give us a modicum of respect in terms of protecting human rights of migrants. That is the United Nations Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Migrants and Their Families. To what extent is Europe implementing that or observing that? I think we should raise these questions.
So for you, that is very critical.
It's very critical. Secondly, if they want actually, we know the declining population in Europe, the workforce in all over Europe is from the Atlantic to the Urals in Russia, the workforce is declining. Let them give specific quotas to Africa. We want Africans of this age and this skill sets to come. Every year we have given you X number. Then it's left for us to interview, to structure this movement regularly, peacefully and decently for our people to go work and come back. Now, coming back to the issue of China, I think, as we speak right now, Mr. President is flying to China. Is it a coincidence that, Theresa May, Prime Minister, and Chancellor Angela Merkel came just a few hours after his departure? I'll tell you what. China today is the biggest financial power in the world. China has $13 trillion in its foreign reserve, 13 trillion. And barring any dramatic military budget spending, it will increase. China has set aside $10 trillion over 10 years, next 10 years, to import products from the world. China has set aside $700 billion to invest mostly in Africa, Latin America, and Central Asia. China has budgeted $1 trillion for the Belt and Road Initiative.
So China sneezing now is making Europe catch cold.
Catch cold, exactly.
Right,
and just interestingly, Chinese, over the next 10 years, 750 million Chinese will go out into the world as tourists. If each one of them spends $1,000, can you imagine how much that will be? That is the power. That is the power.
Thank you very much. We must go. We must go now. Thank you very much, Ambassador Usman Seriki. It's a former Deputy Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations. Thank you very much for coming to the program.
Thank you.
I'd also like to appreciate Dr. Mukhtar Imam, Lecturer, Department of International Relations and Diplomacy. Thank you very much. I know you're itching to say a lot of, but we must go now.
Yes, of course, we must go.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Nigeria Today comes up every weekday of the week. That's at 7:30 in the evening. And you can watch this edition or any edition at all online at www.youtube.com/NTA News 24 Hub. My name is Blessing Abo. Enjoy the rest of your evening.